Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empowering Leaders podcast. At Aleda, we are passionate about inspiring connections and creating a world of collaboration. Our signature program, Aleda Connect, curates groups of 5 to 6 leaders from diverse backgrounds in sport, industry, social venture and the arts who come together to learn, to connect and to collaborate.
It's been amazing. Here you are on this Zoom call, feeling within the first session like you intimately know these people and care for them. And then all of a sudden realizing that even though you're in totally different industries, we're all going through the same thing, or we've been through it and we can help each other, or there's just this hurdle that you can't see past. And then you share it with the group and there's 5 answers in 40 minutes and you think, I have not slept for 2 weeks thinking about that. Like, how is this possible?
You're listening to stories and the breadcrumbs of what makes success, and I constantly get something out of these Zoom calls and catch-ups because we're all living the same stuff, aren't we?
Extraordinary people with extraordinary experience. What happens there is magical.
The Empowering Leaders podcast is proudly brought to you by Victoria University, where cutting-edge sports and exercise science facilities like heat chambers, performance labs, and altitude environments mean VU is ranked 7th in the world for sports science. VU, uniquely you. As always, a big thank you to Jason Nicholas and his team at Temper Bedding, a mattress like no other. If you enjoy listening to the Empowering Leaders podcast, be sure to subscribe, and please, if you have a moment, we would love you to leave a review so we can reach more listeners and empower more leaders. Today on the Empowering Leaders podcast, I'm joined by Dan Rutstein, the president of Orange County Soccer Club in California, a club that has been making waves both on and off the pitch. Dan's got a very fascinating journey. Before leading Orange County, he spent over 2 decades in communication, media and diplomacy, including a career as a British diplomat in Los Angeles. That unique background now shapes his leadership at one of the most innovative clubs in US soccer. Under Dan's guidance, Orange County has built a reputation not just for success on the field, but for creating genuine pathways for young talent. The club has developed and sold players directly into top European leagues, proving that American clubs can be a launching pad for the global game. Dan brings powerful insights on building a high-performing culture, drawing on lessons from both diplomacy and sport. His leadership is helping Orange County prove what's possible for a community-driven club that has a genuine global ambition. Dan, great to see you again, and congratulations, mate, on everything that you've achieved.
Thanks, Darcy. It's great to be on here. We've done some fun things at Orange County, and we haven't won European Cups like some of your other guests from the football world, but yeah, we're doing our best.
Well, I'm speaking to a man who knows podcasts well, who hosts 3 podcasts, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it's far from the traditional background, your life. It's sports journalism, diplomacy, and now professional football club. How have you found those diverse experiences have shaped the way that you run your leadership today?
It's definitely helped me. I mean, a lot of people have more linear backgrounds and they stay in the same industry. I think for me, my ability to bring the skills from a previous industry into the next one has allowed me to succeed in a different way, and I think that for me is the pleasure of the challenge, and it's great to be able to bring those experiences together into different industries. And obviously, it gives me a chance to have a sort of rich and diverse career that I certainly didn't expect to have.
Fascinated with the diplomat role and spending that time in Germany and then in Los Angeles as a diplomat working for the British government. Where have those skills crossed over in running a football club?
Like a lot of things in leadership, it takes you some time to maybe realize some of these things. At the end of the day, a good leader can lead in any environment. And also, a good leader is able to get the most out of their team. So I know it's a bit hackneyed now, but that whole Steve Jobs thing about hiring people smarter than you, what do I know about dynamic ticket pricing and sponsorships and even like game day operations? Very little. But what I do know, I think, how to do is bring people who know those things together and then lead them somewhere. So I think, and it was the same, in diplomacy particularly, you pick up and you land in a new country and you inherit a team who are experts in that country, and your job is to direct them and help them and massage them and then leave it in a way where you can take the team to achieve different things. So I think not really knowing anything about anything is exactly the skill that I need. And that's something, frankly, and this is the fundament to my career, was journalism. So journalism really is about not knowing about something, finding someone who can explain it to you, learning about something, distilling it in a way that makes sense to other people, and then moving on potentially to another topic. So I think journalism allowed me to do diplomacy better, and diplomacy allowed me to sort of run organisations better. And now, at the end of it, I get to run a football team. But it all, like everything in leadership, it's layers upon layers, and that puts you in a position to be able to share and lead.
Brilliant way you described that, Dan. I haven't heard anyone distill journalism in that way, isn't it? Often you're not a subject matter expert on anything, but you do a deep dive on a topic. You speak to enough people, you get a pretty decent understanding of it. But then often you move on to the very next thing, isn't it? So you've got to use those skills over and over again. I haven't thought about that. As you said, not knowing what you don't know can be a skill if you can bring people together. And it feels like that's exactly what you've done at Orange County. For the record, it's a second-tier division of US soccer, but it's still a significant business, turns over multi-millions of dollars. It's a professional league, but you've been able to take some of those community advantages into a more global view. Has that sort of been what you've been able to bring to the table as well?
Yeah, I think, look, you've played a little bit of sport at a reasonable level in front of reasonable sized crowds. And, sport at the top level is an incredible thing. But that's only ever, that's the top 0.5%. But real sport, to an extent, is everything beneath that. So obviously, you had an incredible career, but the beginning of your career was not the end of your career. You will have, as you were going through the youth ranks, you would have played in front of, 5 people, 3 of whom were related to you, in front of no crowds, getting changed in the car park. Every sportsman or woman goes through all of that. In any country, everyone's obsessed with the pinnacle, as they're rightly so. But real sport is what's taking place out of the spotlight. And obviously in England, everyone's obsessed with the Premier League, but the lower divisions, there's another 12 divisions of pro and semi-pro football where thousands of people are going every week to watch games. Obviously over here, you've got, in America, I was at a baseball game recently and somebody was telling me that how it's the most watched sport because there's 80 games in a season, but there's also over 100 teams playing across the country between major league and minor league. And I love that community part of sport. I used to referee soccer at a reasonable level. I'm a fan of a team who weren't actually that good, which meant, smaller crowds and a more intimate relationship with the club. And I think for me, that's where I really fell in love with that part of sport, that middle tier, as it were. And so, our games are fully professional, but it's a 5,000 seat stadium and we sell it out more than we don't now. But fans have a different relationship with the player have a different relationship with the community. We've got fan ownership. And I think there's something about the power of sport to bring people together that it's great at the top level, but in that middle level, you can really have a different experience of it.
It's funny how you mentioned that, Dan, isn't it? Speak to a lot of people who were fortunate enough to play professional sport and they look back at maybe their school team as the most enjoyable time they played the sport because it was at its purest. You played with, and I think the same, you played with these friends that you grew up with from 5 years of age. You spent all day together. On the weekend, all you wanted to do was play with your mates and, it was competitive and those deep friendships were extraordinary. At the professional level, all these layers come on of expectation and public profile and criticism. And there's a purity to community sport, isn't there, that's hard to replicate. I think you look at Wrexham and the great storytelling around their story in the lower leagues of English football, trying to get their way all the way through up to the Championship and maybe to the Premier League. There's something pure about it, isn't there?
There is, and we talk about this quite a lot at work. What are we? Are we a sports team, or as I like to say quite a lot to my side of the business, so the non-sporting side and the business side. We're in the memory making business. So, sport is about moments and it's about, obviously you're a player, so this isn't relevant to you, but the people watching you, if I was to stop 10 Australians in the street and say, tell me your favourite moment, in Darcy's career, they would remember the move you made or what you scored or what you did, but they may also remember who they were sitting next to. Was it round a mate's house, you've just had a barbecue? Was it in the stadium taking your son, daughter, going with your mother or father? Like, that's how you remember, that's how sport interacts with people. And I think for us, that's what we are. It's about making memories. A lot of people, particularly in America, there's a bit more extreme here because of the way baseball works, because it's such a long season. But I think 70% of people don't remember the score of a baseball game or leave before the game's finished. But you see all these people there, win or lose, they're there with their kids. They're enjoying a moment. They're singing the songs. They're taking the pictures. And I think that's what makes sport such an incredible thing to be a part of. Now, obviously, you've been on the field, but you've also been a fan. When you watch the Wallabies or the Socceroos or any other sport that you're interested in, it's that camaraderie. I'm sure you've had some great moments with your son watching sport together, as well as him watching you and you watching him. And I think that's what makes sport so special.
Yeah, again, it's reflective listening to you, Dan, because my own experience is that now I've got a son playing professionally and three younger kids that have all played sport, and you're sort of going now into the stand. The memories are about being there with your wife or the younger kids, and not so much whether you won or lost in the end. It's more about that connection and family. And when you think about legacy, Dan, for you as such a diverse career, keep talking about diplomacy and your career. You worked in a tech business I want to ask you about in a moment, but what do you think is your legacy leading Orange County? What would you like to be remembered for?
I think I'm lucky in a way to join the team when I did, because we were able to be transformative. So in a lot of people's careers, you always need two things to succeed in anything, in sport, in business. You need to be good, and you need to be, it's not so much being lucky, but you need to have the opportunities. And there are plenty of people who have wonderful jobs. But joining Orange County when I did, just coming out of the pandemic, but also where American sport, or where soccer in America is and is going. I joined was sort of 6 years before the World Cup that's coming next year. With all the Wrexham stuff happening and the American ownership, with Lionel Messi playing here, with the TV show Ted Lasso, like, football's growing in this extraordinary way, and we're right in the middle of it. So I've been lucky to be in a position where, if I were good at my job, I could be part of a transformation of a club and a league. And I think I'm lucky that I was able to be there at that time. And we've done some good things. I mean, we've pioneered this player transfer model, which I'd love to take credit for, but that's the other side of the business, as it were. But on my side, this year we're going to sell out 2/3 of our games. We're now looking at increasing the size of the stadium. My front office won best front office in the league last year. Like, we're doing all the things that we can, but I think the bit that makes it special, we can measure it in all the different metrics. Merchandise sales are up, corporate sponsorships are up. But at the end of the day, it's when fans stop me, when I walk around the stadium on game day and say, this club is so different to where it was 3 years ago. Thank you for being part of changing this club. That's what it really is about for us. It's about building a fandom, enhancing a fandom, creating an environment for people to enjoy these memories, and to have seen how much the club has changed and been part of that journey. For me, that's what makes it special. And if there's a point in time I'm not here anymore, to go back to the games and see where it is and remember what it was like, coming out of COVID in, a smaller stadium with fewer fans. I think that journey for us is really special.
It was an amazing story in the US sporting market that's so saturated with amazing historic products, isn't there? The NFL and baseball, and for the round ball game, the global game, to be carving the path through in the World Cup. It's very interesting to watch, and for you guys to be riding that wave so successfully is a great story. Not surprised, Dan, that you're open to joining our Aleda community and getting together with other people around the globe to connect and learn and share. Can you tell us a bit about the group you've been in and what that experience has been like for you?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of sort of grown-up learning, as I like to call it. I think like everybody, when I did my time at university, it was fine, but it was, particularly in England, it's more about drinking than it is about studying. I think I'm allowed to say that now. And adult learning is different. Like if you're making a conscious decision to spend your time when you're busy at work and you're busy with your family, it really needs to be something special. And I think for me, you reach a point in your career in business, particularly in America, once you're any level of seniority, and at least LinkedIn can find you as any level of seniority, probably once every 3 weeks, you go into your message on LinkedIn and somebody's inviting you to join some kind of CEO collective or be part of some special group. And I delete them all immediately because some of them are scams and some of them I'm just not. If I'm going to spend time on these things, they have to be real. And I think I told you this story when we first met, which is a very cynical Australian friend of mine messaged me out of the blue and said, I've just done this leadership course and it's amazing. I think it might be something you'd be interested in. And only because he is so cynical, I realized it must be good. And for me, that was enough. And then obviously I've joined it and it has been everything he said it would be. Look, I don't think I never thought I'd enjoy spending time with 5 Australians as much as I have. But it's been brilliant because, my group they're either in sport, they're sport adjacent, or they're in business, but they all, like most Australians, had played sport at a good level before. And you've got a group of people in very different industries and careers, all sharing exactly the same sorts of problems, just framed in a slightly different way. And being able to sit in a group together, be remarkably vulnerable together to talk through issues in a safe environment has been incredibly useful for me. And I know it's been useful for them as well. I think we all can take a lot away from it because I think there's something I talk about in that group a lot, which is the loneliness of leadership. And I remember when I was a young member of staff, one of my bosses was talking about the loneliness of leadership. And I don't think I had much time for it then. I didn't really understand what he meant. You earn more money than me and you get to do more interesting things. How lonely can that be? But actually, you reach a point in your career where you've got no one to talk to because you're either the boss so you can't sort of moan about staff like you might do when you're mid-level. I'm sure you used to moan about your coaches sometimes over a beer, Dars, but when you are the coach, you can't then take one player and moan about the other players. It's just not how it works. So being able to join in a group of people and talk about issues that they have unique perspectives on is incredibly useful when you're in these sorts of positions. So I've found the whole program incredibly enriching and enhancing and oddly practically useful. So there's a lot of strategies to take away and ways of approaching problems, but there's literally things you can say to people, ways of running meetings, like real tactical things that I've put in place as swiftly as the morning after our sessions when a member of staff's come into my office and I've had to talk to them about something. And being able to do that, it's incredibly useful.
Dan, I think that's the most articulate description that I've ever heard of what that Aleda Connect program's trying to achieve. And I think you're right, that real person learning and zooming out of your own world and being able to practically apply those things has been some of the great benefit. And I know people have absolutely loved learning from your lived experience. I'm going to name that cynical Australian friend because Luke Tunnicliffe is the most cynical person I've ever met in the world, but we benefit a lot because people do pass it on. So thanks to Tunners for connecting us and been great to have you in that program. I've got to pick up on one thing you said, which was sort of you're learning to drink at university, and it leads into your great passion for whiskey, which you've turned into the theme of one of your brilliant podcasts, the United States of America. Tell us about where did the passion for whiskey come from?
It's funny, actually. I was talking to someone about this the other day. Although these are in themselves sort of anecdotes about something that happened, they're a pattern that have actually sort of been the sort of the watchwords for why I've been able to succeed in my career. So I'll start with the whiskey, and this sounds ridiculous because when I say it out loud, it doesn't sound plausible. So, like a lot of people, when I was younger, I maybe overdid it a couple of times, and one night was with whiskey, like whatever cheap student whiskey we were drinking. So even the smell of it for 10 years, I just couldn't go near it. And then I got offered my first overseas diplomacy job, and I was asked to be Deputy Consul General in Dusseldorf in Germany. And the Consul General was Scottish, and I knew that there would be whiskey as part of this job. So I am such a professional that I decided to train myself to drink whiskey so that I could have, because I know that it's part of, Scotch is a big British export, and I knew that there'd be events where we'd be drinking whiskey. So I deliberately trained myself on whiskey. So used my network, found a guy, one of my wife's friends who liked a whiskey. He taught me the journey of whiskey. We went on some light ones, heavily diluted, and we worked up to the point that I could drink whiskey. And my first night in Dusseldorf, the Consul General hosted a reception for a couple of hundred people at his residence in the way that diplomats do all the time. Everyone went home. Him and I stayed. He cracked open a bottle of Glenfiddich 12. We drunk 2/3 of it. And if I had not trained myself for this moment, I think I would have failed my first test with my new boss. And I was hooked after that. And within the diplomatic service, I sort of coined the phrase whiskey diplomacy, and we did a lot. I hosted a lot of whiskey tastings, which were fun, but also a genuine way of using our nation's products to engage and interact with, the people we needed to do business with in that world. And then as I got towards the end of my diplomatic career, and I decided I wanted to try something different. Diplomacy is amazing, and you meet some extraordinary people. And I think, you will have been through a version of this when you were getting near retirement, where, you've got this incredible career that you're having. And when you're about to switch to something else, you don't really know what it's going to be, but it's probably going to be less interesting than the one you were doing before. And I was worried that I wouldn't meet interesting people anymore. So I decided that I'd do a podcast. I wasn't trying to achieve anything. I wasn't trying to get sponsorship or get free whiskey, although that has been a wonderful byproduct. I just wanted to have interesting conversations with people. And now I wasn't a diplomat. I wanted to have some other reason to talk to people. And I set up this podcast. And ironically, a few years later, I was out of work. There was a global pandemic, and I recorded an episode of the podcast with some guy I was put in touch with who happened to own a football team. And we drank a lot of whiskey. We recorded an episode, and he offered me a job at the end of the day. And in some ways it's luck, but in other ways it's what I said earlier on about, creating opportunities. By wanting to network, by being curious, by wanting to meet different people, I ended up getting what's ended up being my dream job. And I've formed a lot of great relationships over the years with the shared thing we have in common, which is whiskey. And I think sport's done the same for me, but whiskey more specifically has as well.
Whiskey diplomacy, Dan, what a great phrase as a British diplomat. And I love the ultimate professionalism, training yourself after that uni experience and it's a PhD in whiskey drinking, and it's taken seriously, isn't it? I mean, people who aren't up to speed on, as I am not, drinking a neat whiskey and a quality whiskey is a badge of honour in it too, by the sounds of it, isn't there?
It sort of is. I think, I'm not going to say whiskey's like sport, but whiskey's like sport. So I was talking to somebody about this the other day. In the same way that I can often remember a goal that's been scored or a try or a home run based on where I was and who I was with at the time, I can actually reference conversations I had with people based on the whiskey we were drinking and where it was. And not because I've got, with some ridiculous memory, but whiskey, like sport, it's about feelings as much as it is about taste, and it's about conversations. And this is sort of the premise of my podcast. You can talk to people in a different way while you're sharing whiskey, but genuinely, there's people I can say, oh, do you remember, we were in this bar and we were drinking a bottle of the Oban 10, and we had a conversation about this, that, or the other. And I think for me, it is about creating moments. And so that's one of the reasons why whiskey and sport are my two favourite things.
So Dan, people listening who love a whiskey, is there one that you think before you die, even if you shared a glass and whatever the price, is there the holy grail of whiskey that everyone who drinks whiskey, God, if I could experience that one bottle, is there one?
For me, there is. I used to do a lot of work with Balvenie over the years, and there's a 50-year-old Balvenie, which when I tasted it was $38,000 a bottle. I think it's now somewhere up to $60,000, and I've had it 3 times, and I've only ever had, $500 worth, but I've only ever had sort of this much at a time. And funny, the first time I had it was with a gentleman called Chris Cusseter, who was the captain of the Scottish rugby team. Well, not at the time, but he's retired, but he's become one of my very good friends and now runs a whiskey company. And we shared this whiskey together, oddly, with Madonna's bagpipe player. So a chap who went on global tour with Madonna playing bagpipes, who worked for Balvenie. We shared this whiskey at Soho House in West Hollywood, and I'll never forget drinking this incredible liquid. But again, I can tell you like who I was with, what I was drinking, what we talked about, and that was a very, very special moment. So that is the one. I wouldn't buy it, but I would drink it.
Scottish rugby captain, Madonna's bagpipe player at Soho House in West Hollywood. Sign me up for that night. There's got to be some good stories out of drinking $40,000 whiskey. That's I love it. It makes me smile.
Are you a wine man, Darcy?
I'm a wine man, Dan. I am, because it's different but the same. I tell this story a bit, but there became money in our game in Australian football. And one of the leaders said, hey, if you want to better yourself in any way, we've got money to pay for it, thinking we'd all go to university and do a degree. One of my mates who was a restaurateur said, mate, sign up for this red wine course. Just trust me. It's $15,000, and I knew nothing about wine. The guy who took it was a French guy obsessed with Bordeaux and red wines, and he sort of got to enjoy the 3 of us AFL players. And the class would finish and he'd say, hang back, we'll go down the cellar. I'm going to take this bottle out that, you know what, just for once in your life, just at any stage, you've got to have a glass of this. And just the history of it, the fact it might have been 25 years old. And he gave us this list and just said, even if there's 12 of you, share the bottle. It might be whatever the price is, $1,500, but just do what you did, have a half a glass. And I was coming home Monday nights with red wine stain around my mouth, just having the best Monday nights for 10 weeks in a row. And it sort of set off this love of red wine for the same reason of the history and the understanding and reading more about it. But normally what you buy one of those bottles late at night where you could be drinking petrol when you're drinking and it wouldn't change. But no, it sort of set me off. But I had a whiskey experience when I was younger, and I haven't trained myself to get over it, where it's been something I enjoy, but you may have inspired me today, Dan.
Very good.
I want to ask you about all the diverse people you've spoken to from sport and Hollywood and everything else in between. Has there been one insight from the podcast that you've thought, God, that's something that surprises me about the vast array of people?
It's an excellent question. I think for me, part of the reason I did the whiskey podcast, but even the other ones that I do, it gives me a chance to sort of satisfy my curiosity of other people's worlds. And the Hollywood one, I just find fascinating. And that one's specifically about rejection and failure in the industry. And we talked to very successful people about how they sort of failed in order to then succeed. And I think I've taken so much sort of non-Hollywood stuff away from that one when they're telling their stories about the things that have happened on their films or their TV shows. I think it's given me sort of lots of things to think about from a leadership point of view. To be honest, I think the most interesting episode I probably did was the former head of the CIA in Russia, who came on to talk about various things, but he told some really interesting whiskey stories, including sort of taking potential Russian defectors to distilleries in Scotland as part of sort of trying to turn them. And it's less about the lessons I learned from that, but it was absolutely fascinating, not just the power of whiskey, But it was the thing that was at the heart of what my whiskey stuff is about anyway, and actually what my sports stuff is about, is the power of relationships and moments and a time and a place. And, for me, everything I've achieved in my career has been about the relationships I've had with staff, with potential partners, with colleagues. And I think hearing how, this is like the nefarious side of it, but hearing how you can sort of leverage people by using time and place and moments and shared experiences was so fascinating to me. And let's say I do it in a less nefarious way. I'm not trying to get anyone to defect, but I might be trying to sell them something or, wanting to come and work for me or whatever it is. But I think, particularly in a world where AI is increasingly becoming a tool that we all use and should use, and I encourage my team to use it, but you cannot beat the power of relationships between people. And I think that's the basis of, success at work, but also I think for me, one of my big leadership takeaways, both in terms of what I've learned from people and how I lead myself, it is about those relationships. And whether your shared ground is whiskey or sport or wherever it is, finding the place you can meet someone and building relationships with them is incredibly satisfying and incredibly empowering, and how you can really make progress.
Yeah, it's a great takeaways of the power of relationships, even more so, as you said, with the AI world, just expanding so quickly amongst us. It feels as though that the authentic relationships are going to be more important, as they always have been, but maybe more important than ever before. Looking back, Dan, if you think of yourself now, is it more of a diplomat who found football, or a football leader who was once a diplomat? How do you frame it in your mind?
It's a great question. I think I have always been obsessed with sport. Not all of us Darcy have been blessed with the natural athletic ability to succeed, which is why I ended up getting further as a referee than I did as a player. But as a kid, just growing up, I loved sport. I loved to be able to, I watched sport, I talked about it, I read about it, I wrote about it, I drew it, anything I could do with sport. And obviously when I was old enough to go and watch things, I watched things. And then obviously I was a sports journalist, which is incredible to be able to sit opposite and ask questions of some incredible sports people from all different sports. And I walked away from sports journalism to have sort of more, not a grown-up job, but I wanted to achieve some other things in my life. And I think diplomacy gave me a chance to do that. But I did keep that thread. And so when I was working in diplomacy, I was the one who brought the world darts champion into the embassy in Berlin to play against our staff. Went to so many Champions League games between English and German clubs. I was always interested in that. And obviously now I'm lucky enough to work in sport for real now. But I think I'm probably I'd love to say sportsman, but it's not sportsman. I'm a sports fanatic who took him 3 different career turns, but eventually found, I think, the right job, which is being immersed in sport. One thing people always ask me, like, what it's like working in sport. And unfortunately, when you get to a certain level of leadership, I'm not going to say anything it doesn't become boring, but every job stops being about the industry and becomes HR and finance and taxes and boring strategy meetings. And there's no way around that. That's 75% of everyone's job. But the 25% that is going to a football game to do your job, to get on the phone and, you don't get into the business of the meeting until you found out what team they support. It's the context that makes it so interesting. And I think, it's amazing running a football team. A lot of it is not fun because, there's a reality to leadership of a $40 million organisation that it can't all just be sitting around, drinking and watching football. But there's a bit of that, and that's the bit that makes the rest of it so worthwhile.
We all are born different. As we grow, the experiences we have develop into outlooks uniquely our own, charting our life's course. No one sees an idea, opinion, or opportunity like you. and no one sees you like VU. Victoria University. Uniquely you.
At Aleda, our signature program, Aleda Connect, is something we're really passionate and proud of. We bring together groups of 5 to 6 people around the globe from diverse backgrounds, sport, industry, social venture and the arts. We come together to learn, to connect and to collaborate.
The thing that I've loved about it is not just the meetings that we have with our group, it's the thinking that you do for days and days afterwards. Someone says something and it sparks a thought, and I found that I would go back and look at things that I was doing in a different light. Within my sport and within women's sport, I'm just someone who I try to lead by keeping people talking about the issues. There's times when I think the person I'm trying to convince is not listening to me. It actually got me thinking about, okay, this is how I need to address my communication with them. So it was so valuable, and the little group that we've got is great, and I'm really looking forward to sort of continuing to connect with them into the future because we're all so very different. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it.
Dan, I read a study recently that basically your number's absolutely on the money, that said if you're operating that 25% of real joy and real passion, that is as good as it gets because you've found the thing you love. And the reality, it doesn't matter what you're doing, the 75% you described as taxes, it's compliance, it's HR, it's doing, but there's a lot of people that have got zero of the 25% and spend their life in that, working in a space that they don't get any joy out of because, you know, they need the security or they don't feel like they can change. And so it's a good lesson, isn't it? Because sometimes we all get into the 75%. We can lose perspective on the fact that the 25% is probably as good as it gets.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's really tricky when you think about, you know, if young people ask you for career advice. And you never know people's circumstances and finances and reasons people need to do different things. But I remember very much when I was younger, I think almost without exception, my best friends from university, I think I can say this, they all got quite boring jobs. You know, they're very successful. And financially are all probably doing significantly better than me. You know, they're partners in law firms and they're, you know, very senior investment banks. You know, they've got real grown-up sort of linear jobs in linear careers doing very well. I remember when I was a journalist in my first job, I was earning £7,500 a year. Now, obviously, this is a long time ago, but even adjusted for inflation, that's still a pretty terrible salary. And I remember going in to see the editor of the newspaper, and I said, look, I can't live like this. I think I had more money when I was a student. And she says, look, this is the salary, stay or go. And I think I got a side job working in a bar for extra money. But I chose to say, because I really enjoyed it. And I could have gone off and earned probably 3 times as much in a boring job somewhere else. But I wanted to do something I enjoyed. And I know there's some very hackneyed expressions about, you know, if you're doing a job you love, you're never really working and all that sort of stuff. That's not quite true, but there's something in that. And I think I'm glad, I'm lucky and privileged, but I'm glad to have only worked in interesting places. And I think I feel like I'm the sort of person that wouldn't be very good at a job I didn't enjoy. And some people are great at it. You know, they can really separate. They go to work, they do a really good job, they do all they need to do, and then they go home and enjoy the spoils of their labour. But I feel like I'd find it really hard to, as a leader, be, as you said, authentic and passionate about something, you know, if I was in charge of an insurance company or similar. I've made career decisions early in my years. You know, I was definitely didn't really have any money. And sport is renowned for not paying people very well at the bottom. But, you know, I've had staff leave this job to go and earn 50% more, and they don't necessarily regret it, but they will admit that working in construction is not as much fun as, you know, construction project management, for example, is not as much fun as, you know, working for a sports team. And I think you've got to make those sacrifices. It's not the same as the athletes, but you guys are exactly the same. I mean, the bottom of every sport, even sports where there's a lot of money at the top, I mean, it's brutal. And I know in America, if you get drafted, you're already into big money. But all those kids who got injured at college who don't get there, you make a lot of sacrifices. And, you know, I can't remember. Could you remember what your first sort of game wage was right at the bottom of your career?
100% I can, to the dollar. And the 7,500 that you mentioned was the sum total of the contract from first year as a full-timer, $500 if you're in the reserve team. So it's $250 in the reserve team, $500 if we won, and then $1,250 if you played in the senior team. So it was below the poverty line, and we all had to work. Yeah, aside of that, it's not, it is a long time ago, but it's not that long ago in terms of professional sport. So yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? You look back, and then you get to the end of your here in Australia as well. Such a fortunate thing to do, and end up earning really good money. But there's always that feeling, God, my mates who went and studied and had their professional careers were 10 links of the straight in front in terms of where they were often in their careers and financially. But yeah, probably a bit like you, Dan, isn't it? That not a good person operating in a space that I don't love. I think I would have been in real trouble. So you sum that up really beautifully. Dan, we're obsessed with this idea of success leaving clues, and great people with stories like yours. There's some patterns around why you live these successful life, and starting this idea of what do you do to fill your cup up, Dan, so you can be your best for others, this idea of self-leadership. What springs to mind when I ask you that? What do you do to fill your own cup up?
It has been podcasting, because of what it's allowed me to do. So I've always had diverse careers. So, I think when I was a journalist, first news, then sport, you write your stories on deadline and all that's all fine. But the bit that's interesting is, sitting in the room talking to the person that you're getting the story from. And obviously, the write-up is the outcome, but the actual sort of enjoyment is the interesting people you meet in the places that you meet them. And so that gave me a lot of the sort of joy I got by sort of scratching my itch around curiosity. And I think, obviously, when you're a journalist, it's literally your job just to meet people and get stories. So that was the job. And then when I was in diplomacy, particularly overseas, you're building relationships, you're achieving certain things, you're promoting the goals of your nation. Again, you have to do that in the company of others. So hosting receptions, sitting in meetings with fascinating people, I found that so interesting. It's a real privilege. I mean, you get to meet some fascinating people. And I think particularly the sort of job I was doing here, you're sitting in a room with the CEO of Starbucks, you're having a meeting at Apple with the leadership there, and you're achieving very specific things, but you're around greatness, and you can feel that you are, even if you're not there to, in this case, interview them. You're hearing how they're talking, you're seeing how they're interacting, and I've always got real value from those sorts of interactions. And then at the point where I wasn't sure I would anymore, I created the podcast to do it for me, and 300 episodes of the different podcasts later, I'll find myself, if I'm sort of stuck in a rut. I don't really get stuck in a rut that much because I run a football team, but when I'm just sort of doing my job, and then I finish up and I look at my schedule, and I've got an hour interview with somebody who wrote one of the Star Wars movies, and suddenly I'm not thinking about ticket sales for this Saturday's game. I'm asking this guy what it was right to write a Star Wars movie. And this was a particular example because I was having a bad day, I remember, and I had this guy on the podcast, and it was so fascinating hearing his journey, his story, his issues, the problems he had, how he overcame them. And I sort of went back to my job after that feeling all enthused and empowered and reinvigorated. And I think that's how I do it. I satisfy my curiosity. And a lot of people do it by reading books and listening to podcasts. I'm lucky enough to be able to do it by interviewing people on podcasts. And I think for me, sometimes I sort of cheat as well. I'll deliberately find a guest who I think might give me a piece of advice that I need at that time in my life, but also happens to make a really good episode of the show, as it were. And I think for me, that's how I stay motivated, is by my curiosity for others and how they live their lives and how they achieve their journeys. And then I can take that and use it to push myself forward.
It's a great description, and concur completely. Just to sit down and, as I am now, writing notes and learning from the wisdom that you're sharing. Has there been one thing that's worked for you, Dan, as a leader that you'd never change?
That's a very good question. I think it has to be, what I touched on before, it has to be the passion. Be fascinating to see what I would be like as a leader in a job I didn't enjoy or a subject I didn't care about. Because I think what makes, and obviously my team would be allowed to disagree with me if they were to listen to this podcast. I think what makes me good as a leader is I really care about the thing that we're trying to achieve. And I've been lucky in a way, although I've run a couple of businesses, the bottom line has not been an issue for me in the way that I've got friends whose, their biggest concern is their number of billable hours at a law firm. As a journalist, we were never near the P&L of the business. I was just about how can I find the most interesting and compelling story for my readers. As a diplomat, obviously I had budgets and so on once I became into a leadership position, but I was representing my nation and advancing the interests of my nation. How can that not be an interesting thing? When you talk to your team about what you're trying to achieve, how can that not be something you want to do? And ironically, when the people of Britain decided to vote for Brexit, that's when I decided I didn't want to be in government anymore, because I didn't want to have to stand up in front of 300 people and give a speech about something that I didn't believe in. So, the passion worked until I didn't believe in the product. And obviously now I work in football. How can you not be passionate about sport? So I think for me, it's the authentic passion that's been it's a line that goes through everything I've done. And I think that will be the thing that will always make me, however good my strategies and techniques are, no one will be able to question my belief and how much I care about the thing that we are trying to achieve is.
And you can see that when you do some research around Orange County, you can see the passion of what you're trying to achieve and the community focus of it with a global ambition, and the language is clear and it's a really clear vision, which again is a pattern we see that people who have success like you have got a vision and then the ability to try and get the team on board. Has there been a visionary leader that you've been able to follow along the way, or someone who inspired you about the way they were able to create and share a vision?
So I feel bad in a way, because I know about 2/3 of your guests have said it's their dads or their mums. And no offence to my old man, but it's not him. But I tell you what, it's a piece of advice he gave me. And this feels like a negative way to answer the question, but he once said to me very early on, when I was first having a problem at work, I think at one of the newspapers I work for, he said, you can learn as much from your bad bosses as you can from your good bosses. So don't just sit there and be annoyed at your boss. Like, think what they're doing that you don't like. And one day, whenever you're in a position, and that day in those days was quite a long way off, use that to decide what sort of leader you want to be by seeing the version you don't want to be. And so it's not to say that I've only had bad bosses, and I don't think it would be very helpful for me to list them all and what was wrong with them. I'd make a great LinkedIn post, but probably not very fair. But I think for me, over the years, I've had some not amazing bosses over the years, and I think I learned a lot from those people, shaping, and a lot of them were before I became anywhere near having my own team. And I think that helped me decide what sort of person I would want to be when I finally had some leadership. I've been lucky to have worked with some pretty inspirational people. And I know you've obviously had guests on here who've talked about, coaches that everyone's heard of, or, managers of teams everyone's heard of. And obviously people won't have heard of these people, but actually the gentleman who I drank the whiskey with, the Consul General in Dusseldorf, he had such an empathetic style of leadership that not everyone appreciated, but that sort of, and it's not about being liked by your team, because that's not the same thing, but the way he dealt, no one, even if, he ended up firing a lot of people because of some structural changes, but no one could say he wasn't like a real human being who had real emotions and real relationships with people. And I think that was the first time I saw that close up. And I think for me, that was really impressive. And then there was my ambassador in Germany, who ended up being the head of the British diplomatic service, Sir Simon. He led in that, it was a very British way, but he led in that very British, visible, public way of leading. And I've learned a lot from that. And I think one of the things I've always done there's not a microphone that I've walked past without stopping to say something. Like I enjoy interviews, I enjoy podcasting, I enjoy standing on a stage giving a speech. And some of it is I enjoy it and I think I'm good at it, but it's also teams find it so empowering to see a confident leader up on stage. And I think I've had that feedback from people that, when I put myself out publicly telling a story about whatever it is we're doing, I think teams like to see a confident leader. And I think I definitely got that from him. And also a weirdly specific nugget, which I loved, which is, he said, it was specific to diplomacy, but I use it a lot still now as well. He said, sometimes as a leader, just you go to an event to say that you were there, which sounds very odd, but it was great in diplomacy. But there's a lot of things I go to so I can then authentically have a conversation with someone saying, when I was at your restaurant, your venue, when I met this person, there's a lot of power in being able to have a lived experience. And I think I got a lot of that from him. And then these aren't necessarily visionary leaders I've worked with, but I like you clearly are because you've set up this whole company. But I love a good sports leadership book. I love reading about Phil Jackson or Sir Clive Woodward. Some of the things they do in the context of something that we only ever see from the outside, you can take away so much from those. So I've had some great sort of role models, but then I've loved diving into stories that I half know and really hearing the whole story. And now I actually get access to people. I love hearing people's inside track on, when they won or lost a championship. You can learn so much about how to lead from how people have managed those situations.
Beautifully said. We've heard you use the word curiosity several times already in this conversation, and it's a huge part of who you are and were as a journalist. Is it something that you generally carve out time for that curiosity so you can implement it, or is it just you being you, Dan?
I think my wife would say it's just me being me. So, we'll go to a dinner party and I'll start talking to someone and she'll say to me afterwards, were you recording a podcast? Because I'm just asking them 20 questions about what it is but I'm genuinely fascinated. And in LA, you meet some really interesting people. And it's not about them being famous, but people don't have normal jobs here. Like very few people are a banker or a lawyer. They all got these weird niche jobs. And I find it so fascinating learning about people's experience. So I think it's just, I don't know if I became a journalist because I was naturally curious or by being a journalist, I developed a curiosity. But my team will often say I love the sound of my own voice, but I love sitting down and asking people questions about whatever it is they do, to the point where apparently sometimes it's even rude in a social setting. But I'm just fascinated by other people's journeys.
Your curiosity's tipped over the edge where you feel like you're recording a live podcast over dinner. I can relate to that. And as you said, your understanding of you're an incredible communicator. You've got the great gift of being able to articulate things in a way very few can. For people listening, communication for us is everything, and great leaders understand their communication, understand how important it is. And as you said, for people to see you out front telling, in this instance, the Orange County story and the way you do is so good for the team. Have you got a mantra of the way you've thought about your communication, or has it just been naturally what you've gravitated to?
So I think there was a trick that I got from Sir Simon, but then when you look into it, it's not his trick. It's about the number 3. So doing everything in 3. So the best number of bullet points, according to science, is 3, and 3 is just it's something that the Greeks believed in terms of the way they did their architecture. It's in thirds. Like 3 seems to be this sort of natural occurring magic number, but I use it a lot for communication. So when I give speeches, I always have 3 points. Now, sometimes there's 9 points because it's multiples of 3, but it allowed me, because I love to not have notes when I do public speaking. I think people standing up on stage looking at their phones, I find incredibly irritating. But even if they've got a little piece of paper, that's sort of okay. But I love speaking without notes where I can. And I was able to develop this whole thing where I'd go up there and I have 3 points, and three's really easy to remember. So when you're doing public speaking, you can do it in threes. So when you're giving a speech in front of a few hundred people, it's a great technique. But actually, when you've got your leadership meeting with your 5 people, having 3 points, it's enough points that you can make, but it's not too many that it's indigestible. And signposting people. So I'm a big fan of. There's 3 things I want to say about this, and you sort of say what the 3 things are. I remember when I left my job in LA at my leaving party, my entire staff turned up in T-shirts which said, "Just 3 points I'd like to make," because it became my thing. But it's a genuine, easy communication tool. But I really took it to an extreme. So often I remember in meetings that they go around the table and I got 3 points to make here, and I might have only had 2. I have to make up a third one, but it buys you time to do it. But I think using that communication tool, I've done it. Let's say I've done it a lot on stage, on panels, in speeches, but even in normal meetings with people. And it's a sort of device, but that's how you become an effective communicator, is by having something you can use. And also when people expect it and you can signpost it, it keeps your audience engaged. We had a chap drop in on one of our sessions in our group as part of your course, who was the chief of staff to the head coach at the Green Bay Packers, and whose background was communication. And I was very excited when he said, "So it's very important to have 3 points." So this is not new, but standing up on stage and saying, like, "There's 3 things I want to tell you." You tell them the points, and then you tell them what you've just told them. They all go away remembering those things. And I think for me, that's been one of my most powerful communication tools that I've used almost in every scenario where I'm speaking to more than 1 or 2 people.
Power of 3. I love it. Thanks for sharing that. Dan, who has been the greatest leader in your life?
It probably was the Consul General from Dusseldorf, because he was only my boss for 2 or 3 years. He was actually my boss twice in the end, but he was my boss when I first became a leader. So I went from managing 0 staff to managing 40 overnight. And so I imagine I was not great at the beginning, and I think he made a huge professional difference for me. And I think the second person, and I think I can tell this story, is at the football club when I joined the club. So the way it works is we've got an owner who obviously runs the club and is my boss, and then there's 2 presidents. There's me and then the president side of the soccer side of the business. And there was a chap called Oliver Wies, who when I arrived was our soccer president. He's now left and he's now the sporting director for the whole of our league. And both of his children died of pediatric cancer. And he set up a charity in their name. And when he was incredibly good at his job, but to be able to do his job in the context of what had happened in his life, and then sort of switch to the fundraising that he did for this charity, Soccer for Hope, it was so inspirational. And obviously you've got kids, and it's hard to imagine what that would be like for somebody, and to just the way he carried himself at work, and then the way he never talked about this unless he was asked about it, but in the side to be running this incredible charity that's changing lives since, I think has been as a way to conduct oneself, and a sort of stoic, powerful, emotional, authentic figure. It was incredibly impressive to see.
Yeah, hard to imagine walking in those shoes, isn't it? To have kids with pediatric cancer lose their lives, but still be able to find a way to be the person that you just described is an incredible story. And thanks for sharing that. Soccer for Hope, something to definitely look up for sure. You look at as you said, your passion for people and your curiosity to just tell great stories and keep that going, and being able to connect and collaborate with amazing people, former head of the CIA in Russia, and a diverse range of people living in Hollywood and where that takes you, and around Los Angeles. Has there been someone you thought, God, that's the one person I'd love to collaborate with, whether it's a whiskey story or any of your other great passions? Is there a name that springs to mind?
It's another. You should do this for a living. Another great question. You know what? So not a specific person. So I was thinking about, you have asked this of other people, so I thought this question might come. So it's been a privilege for me to spend time with fascinating people from the world of sport, including yourself, from the world of Hollywood. And obviously I was involved in government, and I worked with some very senior people and did stuff for the Prime Minister. So I've had access to sort of politics and sport and entertainment. I think and I've spent some time dealing with people in non-profits, partly, Oliver, who I reference, is another friend of mine who set up a foundation after his son was killed by a drink driver, who we work very closely with. But it's the sort of unsung hero is the person I don't meet as often as I'd like to. And I think like the principal of a school who's had to turn around some real social issues, or somebody in a healthcare setting, I think so it's less a person and more, I'd love to spend some time exploring the stories of sort of leadership and the journeys of people in those places, because they're the ones who, see, in America, people at non-profits get paid remarkably well compared to probably Australia and definitely England. But the people they're not doing this for the glory, they're not doing this for public adulation or probably money, but like the real authentic community leaders, I think they're the people I've not spent time with and hearing their stories. And I think for me, that's an area that I've not explored, and I'd love to. I did a little bit when I was a journalist, and I'd say I've done a little bit here with the non-profit we work with. But I think for me, that's an area where I don't really know, where people are changing lives, not just, making money or entertaining people. I think for me, that's the area I'd love to explore more.
Great note to finish on, Dan. It's part of what inspires the privilege of having you in our Aleda community. There's so many great people doing great things out there, and the opportunity to share those stories is a real privilege, including yours, which just fascinates me. I could spend the next 5 hours, then maybe see if I could work my way through a whiskey and tell some more stories and hear some more of your stories. Would be brilliant. But thanks again for taking the time. I really enjoyed every bit of it. I got notes everywhere from your shared wisdom. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Dan.
Super. Darcy, it's been a pleasure to be part of this podcast. Might actually steal a couple of your questions for one of my shows. And it's been great to be part of the Aleda community, which rather embarrassingly, it was only this morning when I was preparing for this that I realised that Aleda is a leader. And I'm not quite sure how it took me so long to realise that. So that's quite a clever name for your business, but very obvious as well. So there you go. That was my big learning from today.
We spent a bit of time thinking about that, so I'm glad it got through. Thanks, Dan.
Brilliant. Cheers, Darcy.